Hello, everybody. Melissa Treebwasser here, part of the Frogs Insider podcast. Special episode today. Really excited to have Jacob Dyksterhouse, TCU tennis aficionado, super fan, and I would say one of the experts in the field when it comes to the Horned Frogs at the net. Jacob, thank you so much for joining us from just a couple of thousand miles away.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me on. It's happy to be here. Talk some tennis.
Yeah, if you've spent any time on Twitter or the TCU Horned Frog Blitz message board, you are probably familiar with Jacob, who has done an excellent job of covering TCU tennis over the last several years, almost point by point. Was a huge assist to many of us throughout TCU's run to the national championship. Throughout their Wimbledon run, and just kind of keeping, I would almost say you're the TCU tennis insider at this point. You are knowledgeable, you know the players, you talk to the players, you provide more insight than just about anybody out there. And that's why we wanted to have you on to talk about TCU's run to the national championship, the transfer portal, and then of course the run at Wimbledon that is ongoing at the moment. So let's start here at the beginning. TCU Tennis has been an elite program for several years, kind of one of the almost new blue bloods in the country, but had taken so long to kind of get David Roditi over the hump and into the national championship. What was different this season than in years past, where they seemed to always come close but couldn't quite summit the peak to winning the actual national championship here in 2024?
Well, I think honestly, it comes down to health. I thought that last year, so that would be what, 2022, 2023, we had a fantastic team. I mean, we were old, we were deep with Luke Famba playing the two, where he played one at just about every other school in the country, and then Xander Jong playing the four for us. I think that Luke's injury, he had an ankle injury just before the NCAA team tournament started, and that really didn't help. And then this year, I mean, I was hoping we would be good. Looking at losing two guys like Luke and Xander, you never know what's going to happen. And then you looked at, so two summers ago now, it was Pedro Vives had a fantastic summer and a great fall. And Jack Pennington Jones had a great fall as well, even playing through injury most of the time. He still won matches. And then Jake Fernley really took that next step, playing some professional tournaments. And during the season, we got out to the hot start, made the indoor finals again for the third time in a row. Weren't able to win that one. It was a really close match. Sucks we lost. But you kind of saw the potential that this team had in that tournament. And then you had injuries to Seb and to Jake. And that kind of threw a wrench in our regular season, really. Losing a couple matches we probably wouldn't have lost without them. And Jake was able to come back during the Big 12 tournament, which I think is the reason that we beat Oklahoma and made it to the final against Texas. And then I think they really took care of Seb throughout the year. They said, don't rush back. We want you to come back when you're fully healthy. And he came back, I think, the second weekend of the NCAA tournament and was fully healthy and was able to work his way back in slowly because of the depth that we had with the freshmen coming in and winning some really big matches. And you saw it in the Texas match. It came down to Seb in court 5, and he was able to get it done for us.
It gave us one of the most thrilling moments in TCU athletics history against a hated rival in their last year in the league. And then kind of turncoated there, and for good reasons. Like, I don't think anybody that kind of knows Seb's situation, where he's from, who he's dating, all of those things, it made a lot of sense for him when the opportunity presented itself to, if you can't beat them, join them, but in reverse, I guess, if you can't beat them, bring them over to your squad. Seb leaves shortly after TC's national championship victory. And that kind of transitions us nicely into the future of this team. You talked about being old a year ago and the guys that they lost. Well, they're going to lose some players this year, it seems, as well, not just to the portal, but to the professional ranks. How do you see this roster looking different? And what has TCU done in the transfer portal and recruiting to ensure that they can be a competitor and in the mix for a national championship again in 2025?
Yeah, so I think really there are two ways that next year's team could go. we could be at the top again, or we could be in a major rebuilding mode. And I think that Seb's departure kind of took the coaches by surprise. I think it took everybody by surprise as soon as it happened, and then learned a little bit more about the situation. You're like, okay, I understand. And listening to a podcast that Coach Roditi was on, I think last week, there wasn't much bad blood, it sounded like. And I know that Jack is going to stay with him in the fall and playing some pro tournaments down in Austin. So, and he played with Louis in doubles a couple weeks ago at a professional tournament as well. So, not too much bad blood. It always leaves a sour taste in your mouth when you go to a hated rival, of course. And so, I think that the coaches noticed that and are focusing really on chemistry, team chemistry, and so they're being very picky with who they take out of the portal. And Seb's really one of the very, very few players to transfer out of TCU while Coach Roditi is the head coach. I think there was one other guy a couple years ago transferred to Baylor, but that's all I can really remember. And so in terms of portal, we've had Philip Altauer. He's a Czechia guy, or a guy from Czech Republic, and he played at Tennessee last year, and he'll play probably the 5-6 spot for us, unless JPJ decides not to come back. And that's really going to be the deciding factor to whether or not we're going to be up top 10, top 15 team again next year, or rebuilding. And I think in the middle of the summer, when he had that great tournament up in Nottingham and beat Cam Norrie, made the run through the qualifying tournament to the semifinals or quarterfinals, it seemed kind of bleak that he was going to come back. But in talking to some people and talking to him, I think he wants to come back. I don't know if he will or not. I think he's still weighing his options as well. There are a lot of things to consider, honestly, like prize money playing pro tournaments versus NIL money that he can get at TCU. And that, I think that will end up being the deciding factor. Does he think he can make more money playing the pro tournament, or come back to TCU, make a decent amount in the NIL world, and save up a little bit? Because especially as a young player playing professional tournaments, your travel, your housing, it's not covered at all. And so that I think that was one of the biggest benefits for Jake getting the wild card into Wimbledon and then playing a match there. The prize money for like the losing in the first round it's a lot of money, and that can basically fund travel for a year where you can work on your ranking, get in some better tournaments. So whether or not JPJ can do well in the fall, because he's not going to be at TCU in the fall. That's decided already. He's going to do what Jake did last year and play professional tournaments all fall, get his ranking up, and then he'll make the decision whether or not to come back to TCU in the spring. And if he does, I think we'll have a good team. It won't be as good, as deep as last year. I mean, you're losing Jake Fernley and Tommy had one of the most clutch wins of the tournament as well against Ohio State. It was an incredible match. You're losing those guys, and you have freshmen coming up who don't have too much match experience. But the only way to get match experience is to play the matches.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a double on catch-22 there. And so yeah, I think we'll be okay. I trust Coach Roditi. He has a lot of experience, and he has a fantastic reputation in the field. If you watched Wimbledon and the coverage over the past couple of days, you heard a lot of talk about TCU tennis, and everybody respects Coach, and everybody knows what he can do with players and how he can prepare them to be successful on Wimbledon's biggest stages.
Well, there's three things that you touched on that I want to dig deeper into: NIL, Coach Roditi, but I want to start where you finished, and that's in what can that type of exposure you talked about. I mean, seeing TCU shirts in the stands, having TCU fans there, talking about Roditi, seeing, guys like Cam Norrie who continuously talk about TCU. What does that mean in a sport like tennis, where recruiting is so much more of an international game than it is in really any other sport? and where TCU now has a chance to continually increase its reputation on the international stage and the world's biggest stage for tennis.
Oh yeah, it's massive. And if I think tennis is the most international sport in college sports.
Yeah.
Like
Tennis
you
and
don't
probably
think of,
golf are the two,
yeah,
right?
tennis and golf, yeah. And to see Jake and Cam do so well, and yes, they're both English, but you have Reese Stalder played in the doubles in the main draw of Wimbledon as well, and he's American. Jack played in the qualifiers and didn't play terribly well. I think he'll say that himself, but that's a massive draw as well. And in the boys singles that are going on right now, uh, Jagger Leach, he's Lindsay Davenport's son, who is a massive name in tennis. He's a
Yeah.
commit for 2025.
Oh,
And
really? Wow. That's
yeah,
cool.
so I think he's a top 30 player in the world, and he's a 2025 commit, and he's in the main
Wow.
draw of the boys. There are a couple other players that we're looking at, but as for international recruiting goes, everybody pretty much knows about TCU tennis, and a lot of that is because of Cam. Uh, Talking to Coach Roditi, he said that his recruiting, it's hard because there are so many players. The players kind of reach out to the coaches, and in some extreme cases, the coaches can approach the players, but it's really the coaching staff is three coaches in college tennis.
Yeah.
There is not enough manpower to cover everywhere in the world. So a lot of it is reliant on former players recommending guys
Wow.
or players reaching out to the coaches themselves saying, "Hey, I would love to get a couple of years of college experience under my belt and maybe get a degree." And what Coach Roditi and our tennis program are really in a great position to do is they take a look at the players because Coach understands how important that international reputation is. And tennis, while there are a lot of players, it's a small world in the professional sphere. And if you have a guy who comes in and maybe isn't the best sport or doesn't represent the team the best way on a big stage, it has negative impacts. And luckily, Coach Roditi has been able to kind of siphon out those guys. And you see guys like Cam, like Jake. Jack, I think, is going to be the same way. He loves TCU, and he's that next guy. So I think that it has a great impact for TCU. And I mean, all publicity is good publicity, but good publicity is great publicity.
Yeah. That's a great way of
So,
putting it.
I think just watching Wimbledon, it was so cool to see the pundits just give credit where credit's honestly due to Coach Roditi and Devin Baldwin as well.
Yeah, and you talk about Coach Roditi and obviously in such glowing terms, and we all do. He's a guy that, as good as TCU has been, there are certainly blue blood tennis programs out there that have called, Roditi over the
Oh
years.
yeah.
And even being a TCU alum, I am sure that there have been overtures that have been tempting for him. I mean, we've seen the most loyal guy. Gary Patterson is wearing, green and yellow next year. So, and wore burnt orange and white. So we can see, the loyalists go. What is it not just about Dave Roditi, but also Coach Bowen, who Devin Bowen probably could have been running his own program for the last several years. For those two guys to stay and be committed, what is it that's kept them in Fort Worth? And then also help them draw, Scott Perlman is joining the coaching staff this year, and he's a guy who has, decades of elite experience at the highest level. Why do people not just want to be a part of TCU tennis, but are willing to stay committed to this tiny little program in Fort Worth that's kind of taken the world by storm?
Yeah, I think Coach Roditi hasn't left because he'll say it himself. TCU is his dream job. It's his
Mm.
dream school. It's where he went to college. As you mentioned, he had a lot of success here himself. And I know if you pay attention to football recruiting, when the recruits say, "Oh, TCU is my dream school," doesn't usually turn out well
Yeah,
for
that's usually when they
TCU.
leave. Yeah.
But in terms of coach and tennis, I'm sure there have been approaches from other schools, but I really can't see Coach Roditi leaving. I was a little bit worried about Coach Bowen, but I think that his mentality and Coach Roditi's as well is it's all about the kids.
Yeah.
and we want to help them be successful. And so where he's doing it doesn't really matter, but and I want to give credit to Jeremiah Donati as well.
Mhm.
And I think TCU is one of the best funded tennis programs in the country. I think that has a lot to do with it. Not another school won't offer Coach Bowen much more than I think he's being paid now. I think Coach Roditi understands how integral he is to our program, and he knows he has to pay him in order to keep him. And I can't confirm that or anything like that, but
Well,
that
it's
makes
yeah, but
sense to
the proof
me.
is in the pudding, right?
Yeah, exactly. Um, and I think Coach is just really well respected. He goes about things the right way. He'll correct his own players when they make a call that's in and they call it out. He'll correct his own players and say, no, that ball was in. Come on. But he'll also stick up for his players
Mm.
when the ball he thinks the ball is out. So I think there's a lot of mutual respect around that in the sport of tennis, and that's really what it comes down to.
You talked about TCU being one of the most well-funded programs. I see a lot of people who, feel like football is the end all be all. And we all understand football is the bell cow for any university athletics department that has a program in the Division One. But I think TCU Tennis is such a good argument as to why all of your resources should not be allocated to just one program and why it's important for NIL dollars to go to other programs. I obviously, want to consistently advocate for the women's side of all of this and women's basketball and what it means to have players like Sedona Prince and Haley Van Lith and
Oh, absolutely.
but having a Cam Norrie, having a Jake Friendly, having a JPJ, these guys that can be on the international stage and draw positive attention to the university. That's why you have to allocate funds across the board. You kind of already touched on this, but as far as what TCU Tennis is doing in NIL, and then on the flip side of that, where there still needs to be investment when it comes to facilities and updates for that thing. Why would you tell people that don't know a lot about that program we need to be continually supporting and funding that program because of what?
Because they win. I think
That's
is
a
the
perfect to
simple
the
answer.
end. Mic
Yeah,
drop, right?
I think that's the simple answer. I mean, this is the first NCAA championship since like what, the 1960s with women's golf?
Yeah,
Was that
first
it?
team
Or was it the
championship.
70s?
Yeah, I think the
Yeah.
70s.
Yeah, which I mean, that's enough for me personally. But I think you touched on it as well, where when you said on the international stage, the world's a big place, and as Americans, we can forget that sometimes.
Mhm.
I mean, nothing wrong with that. U.S. is the best country in the world, but the world's a big place, and unfortunately, women's basketball and those sports, they definitely deserve funding, but people in Europe don't really care
Yeah,
about Americans and women's basketball. But they care about tennis.
yeah.
Like tennis is a top three sport in the world. If you're looking at world
Mm.
numbers, not US numbers, it's like soccer and then tennis and cricket. And those are
Yeah.
the three big ones.
And we don't have
And
men's soccer at TCU, so tennis
exactly.
rings the bell for us there.
Yeah, tennis carries. And that's why I think we should continue to support it. And it's going to be really interesting with the NCAA settlement that came out a couple weeks ago to see what happens with tennis, especially in terms of the scholarships.
Hmm.
Because men's tennis only has 4.5 scholarships right
Oh,
now.
really? So it's akin to baseball. It's probably about the percentage is about the same for roster spots.
Exactly. I think there are 10 to 12 roster spots, and you get 4.5 scholarships to
Wow.
kind of divvy up. And women's tennis is a little bit better. They have 8 full scholarships
Okay.
for I think 10 roster spots. But
But
the
that could change
interesting,
with Title IX too, because we have no
oh,
idea what the future
absolutely,
of Title IX is. Yeah.
absolutely. But I do think with the NCAA not limiting scholarships anymore, it'll be very interesting to see what goes on with tennis. And I think TCU is in better shape than a lot of other schools just because of
Mhm.
how much they do care about tennis. But I could definitely see schools taking away those 4.5 scholarships from the men's side in order to give them to baseball or
Hmm.
basketball or the revenue sports. And with that, the funding could kind of dry up. It's really up to the coaches, and Coach Roditi knows that. He is, I think, as involved in the community as any other
Yeah,
coach
Absolutely.
at the school. And that's why we need NIL to keep getting those players like Jack, like Pedro, like Louis. There's not an American on our team right now, actually,
Wow.
looking at it. Duncan is the closest, and he's Canadian, I believe.
At least
So,
touches America, so it's close
yeah,
enough.
yeah. But just about everybody's European, and Seb would have changed that. And they're looking at a couple guys right now that are coming into school, who are American. But really, if we want a good program, we're going to need to continue to recruit internationally, and that's the big thing about it. And NIL is important, as important to anything, because if they're not going to get the scholarships, TCU is not cheap.
No. Yeah.
I know that from going there,
Yeah.
and to be able to pay the guys, we need to do that, and that's a big draw for tennis. Is the scholarships, paying them to get somebody to come to your school? They shouldn't have to pay. It used to be that the big draw was the facilities,
Hmm.
and with the funding, with paying schools directly paying players, and the funding being what it is, tennis might see a little bit less of that funding going forward, because it is a non-revenue sport, and that, I think, that's just is what it is. But facilities are going to be just as important as they've always been, but I don't know if schools are going to be able to emphasize that as much going forward. I know that our outdoor facilities are top notch. They are some of the best in the country. I mean, you go to the purple courts, they're iconic. The tennis center is great. I mean, the shade cover that they provide, the bleachers, is great, especially in the summertime, the fall and the late spring. And the indoor is about the opposite, I
Yeah.
think. At only 4 courts instead of a full 6, you have to wait to play 2 matches, which is tough. Luckily, our team is good enough to where we don't normally need those 2 matches. But I think, talking to Coach Roditi, he knows. And there's not cameras in there, so you can't watch the matches if you're not there. He definitely knows, and I think because he knows, I'm sure that Donati knows as well, and that is on the list. It has to be. Especially, I think they've earned it a little bit in
Oh,
upgrade
for sure.
with the win this year.
Yeah.
So hopefully that'll happen, and with the outdoor facilities and indoor facilities on the rise, I think that'll really help alongside NIL to continuously draw players to TCU.
And that's going to be what's so interesting is for Jeremiah Donati, how do you balance the facility upgrade money that you continuously are asking for with the NIL money that you now need to ask for, and prevent donor fatigue? I mean, TCU donors have been taxed to build a football stadium and a football indoor facility and a performance center. And now the needs never end. But what do you prioritize, NIL dollars or facility upgrades? And thankfully, TCU is in a position where they have a nice endowment where they can find a way to do both, but there's still a really small alumni base, and there's only so many billionaires to go around in the world. As we get ready to wrap up here, the last thing I want to talk to you about is the future of TCU tennis. I'm going to make this kind of a two-part thing. Number one, we've heard ad nauseum about realignment and how that impacts things like basketball and football predominantly, especially with the new look Big 12. Tennis is a little bit different because TCU's Big 12 tennis schedule does not necessarily look like a Big 12 schedule. How is this new look Big 12 going to impact TCU from a scheduling perspective, if at all? And then give us 2 players that aren't the big names that we've been paying attention to through this run, but that you think are going to be kind of the cornerstones of this program going forward.
Yeah, well, I don't think their schedule will be terribly impacted by it. I mean, you do have to have the certain number of conference matches, but something that I think Coach Roditi does really well is he doesn't shy away from scheduling the big
Yeah.
teams. And so these past couple of years, we've played Texas twice, we've played Baylor twice, we've done the home and home with them. We did the trip out to the West Coast this year and played UCLA, USC, Pepperdine, all 3 of which are generally known as very good programs. So in that aspect, I don't think it'll be impacted too much. Instead of playing Texas twice, getting a home and home, we'll probably split with them. We'll play at their place one year and our place the next. But other than that, I don't think it'll be affected too much by realignment. And I mean, talking to Coach Roditi on our podcast a couple months ago, he didn't even really know what was going on with realignment.
Yeah, it's whoever they write down on the website, that's who he'll show up to play, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I don't think that'll be too affected by anything. As for two players to look for, everybody of course knows JPJ and Pedro, but I think that Duncan Chan could be
Mm,
a really good player for us. He had some really clutch wins. He was the clinching win against Baylor, I think, in one of his first collegiate
yeah,
matches, which is a massive win. And then really the lineup or the roster is so small that that I don't know if people have heard of probably all the players, but I'm actually going to take a guy, go off the conventional track here and go with a guy who doesn't do too much on the court, but is probably the one of the most important pieces of the team. And I'll shout out Luke Swan
mm,
for a moment. And Jack told me, he said Luke Swan is probably the best thing that I've contributed to TCU tennis
wow,
because of what he does, pumping up the guys off the court and cheering for him. He's the loudest guy in the stands every single match.
that's
He worked
awesome.
his butt off to get Jake Fernley some shirts and stuff for Wimbledon in that aspect, and worked with Dawson, who used to run TCU Barstool, to get Jake and Jack some Barstool sponsorships for Wimbledon,
That's
which was
super
really
cool.
cool to see. And I think he is a really important part of TCU tennis, and he deserves some recognition. So I'll go with Duncan as a on the court guy, and I think he's going to have a really good career for TCU. And Luke is an incredible hype man, and he can step up when he needs to. It's not like he's a slouch.
I love that. I think that's a great call. I always love to shine a spotlight on the guy that kind of keeps everything together,
Yeah.
around a team. You always have to have that player. Jacob, this has been super awesome. Your knowledge and depth and just kind of insight to TCU tennis, I think, is something we don't hear enough about. And so we'll certainly have to bring you back on, through the indoor and the outdoor season as your availability allows. Tell people where they can follow you if they want to get these kind of match by match updates throughout the season and the professional season for TC's guys that are out playing on the big stages.
Yeah, well, I'm on the sports board, of course, helping run a couple threads there. And on Twitter, I'm the London Froghorn. And then we do a podcast, or I have a couple friends and I who do a podcast, and we haven't done it in a couple weeks or a couple months, I guess now. But it'll start up, I'm sure, back in the fall. It's called TCU's Three Wisemen, spelled WHYSMEN. And we really like, I think this year in particular, we're going to start covering some of the non-revenue sports and really trying to prop them up because they're there too. And I
Yeah.
think the beach volleyball team is
Yeah, they're
incredible.
killer too. Yeah.
Yeah, we have two Olympians on our beach volleyball team.
Yeah, which is amazing. Yeah.
So if I'm hoping to get in touch with them and have them on, but during the tennis season, we have some of the players on every other week or so, and we're hoping to continue that this year as well.
That's awesome. Yeah, definitely check out podcast. Give Jacob a follow across all the platforms. And again, we just super appreciate your time, your knowledge, your insight. And we'll keep in touch with you here throughout the indoor and the outdoor season, and continue to get your unique insight and expertise for TCU tennis. Thank you so much, Jacob. Appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you.